Incarnate teachers and incarnation. Wherever his name is spoken, that very place is holy. How much more so is the man who speaks of his name, and with what veneration ought we to approach that man, out of whom comes to us spiritual truth. Such great teachers of a spiritual truth are indeed very few in number, as in this world. But the world is never altogether without them. They are always the fairest as flowers of human life, the ocean of mercy without any motive. Know the Guru to be me, says Sri Krishna in the Bhagavata. The moment the world is absolutely bereft of these, it becomes a hideous hell and hastens on to its destruction. Higher and nobler than all ordinary ones are another set of teachers, the avatars of Ishvara in the world. They can transmit spirituality with a touch, even with a mere wish. The lowest and the most degraded characters become second saints at their command. They are the teachers of all teachers, the highest manifestations of God through man. We cannot see God except through them. We cannot help worshipping them, and indeed, they are the only ones who we are bound to worship. No man can really see God except through these human manifestations. If we try to see God otherwise, we make for ourselves a hideous caricature of him, and believe the caricature to be no worse than the original. There is a story of an ignorant man who was asked to make an image of the god Shiva, and who, after days of hard struggle, manufactured only the image of a monkey. So wherever we try to think of God as he is in his absolute perfection, we invariably meet with the most miserable failure, because as long as we are men, we cannot conceive him as anything higher than man. The time will come when we shall transcend our human nature and know him as he is. But as long as we are men, we must worship him in man and as man. Talk as you may, try as you may, you cannot think of God except as a man. You may deliver great intellectual discourses on God and on all things under the sun. Become great rationalists and prove to your satisfaction that all these accounts of avatars of God as man are nonsense. But let us come for a moment to practical common sense. What is there behind this kind of remarkable intellect? Zero. Nothing. Simply so much froth. When next you hear of a man delivering a great intellectual lecture against this worship of the avatars of God, get hold of him and ask him what his idea of God is, what he understands by omnipotence and omnipresence, and all similar terms beyond the spelling of the words. He really means nothing by them. He cannot formulate as their meaning any idea unaffected by his own human nature. For he is no better off in this matter than the man in the street who has not read a single book. That man in the street, however, is quiet and does not disturb the peace of the world, while this big talker creates disturbance and misery among mankind. Religion is, after all, realization, and we must make the sharpest distinction between talk and intuitive experience. What we experience in the depths of our soul is realization. Nothing, indeed, is so uncommon as common sense in regard to this matter. By our present constitution, we are limited and bound to see God as man. If, for instance, the buffaloes want to worship God, they will, in keeping with their own nature, see him as a huge buffalo. If a fish wants to worship God, it will have to form an idea of him as a big fish, and man has to think of him as man. And him, these various conceptions are not due to morbidly active imagination. Man, the buffalo, and the fish all may be supposed to represent so many different vessels, so to say. All these vessels go to the sea of God to get filled with water, each according to its own shape and capacity. In man, the water takes the shape of a man. In the buffalo, the shape of a buffalo. And in the fish, the shape of a fish. In each of these vessels, there is the same water of the sea of God. When men see him, they see him as man, and the animals, if they have any conception of God at all, must see him as animal, each according to its own ideal. So we cannot help seeing God as man, and therefore we are bound to worship him as man. There is no other way. Two kinds of men do not worship God as man: the human brute, who has no religion, and the Paramahansa, who has risen beyond all the weaknesses of humanity and has transcended the limits of his own human nature. To him, all nature has become his own self. He alone can worship God as he is. Here too, as in all other cases, the two extremes meet. The extreme of ignorance and the other extreme of knowledge. Neither of these goes through acts of worship. The human brute does not worship because of his ignorance, and the Jiva Muktas, or free souls, do not worship because they have realized God in themselves. Between these two poles of existence, if anyone tells you that he is not going to worship God as man, take kindly care of that man. He is, not to use any harsher term, an irresponsible talker. His religion is for unsound and empty brains. God understands human failings and becomes man to do good to humanity. Whenever virtue subsides and wickedness prevails, I manifest myself to establish virtue, to destroy evil, to save the good. I come from yuga to yuga, or from age to age. Fools deride me, who have assumed the human form, without knowing my real nature as Lord of the universe. Such is Sri Krishna's declaration in the Gita on incarnation. When a huge tidal wave comes, says Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, all the little brooks and ditches become full to the brim without any effort or consciousness on their own part. So when an incarnation comes, a tidal wave of spirituality breaks upon the world, and people feel spirituality almost full in the air. The mantra, Om, word and wisdom. But we are now considering not these Mahapurushas or great incarnations, but only the Siddha Gurus or teachers who have attained the goal. They, as a rule, have to convey the germs of spiritual wisdom to the disciple by means of words or mantra to be meditated upon. What are these mantras? The whole universe has, according to Indian philosophy, both name and form as its conditions of manifestation. In the human microcosm, there cannot be a single wave in the mind stuff unconditioned by name and form. If it be true that nature is built throughout on the same plan, this kind of conditioning by name and form must also be the plan of the building of the whole of the cosmos. As one lump of clay being known, all things of clay are known. So the knowledge of the microcosm must lead to the knowledge of the macrocosm. Now, form is the outer crust, of which the name or the idea is the inner essence or kernel. The body is the form, and the mind or the antakarna is the name. Then the sound symbols are universally associated with name in all beings having the power of speech. In the individual man, the thought waves rising in the limited or mahat or mind stuff must manifest themselves, first as words and then as more concrete forms. In the universe, Brahma, or the cosmic, first manifested himself as name and then as form, or as this universe. All this expressed sensible universe is the form behind which stands the eternal inexpressible, or sphata, the manifester as logos, or word. This eternal sphata, the essential eternal material of all ideas or names, is the power through which the Lord creates the universe, or the Lord first becomes conditioned as the sphota and then evolves himself out as yet more concrete, sensible universe. This sphota has one word as its only possible symbol, and this is Om. And as by no possible means of analysis can we separate the word from the idea, this Om and the eternal sphota are inseparable, and therefore it is out of this, the holiest of all holy words, the mother of all names and forms, the eternal Om, that the whole universe may be supposed to have been created. But it may be said that although thought and word are inseparable, yet there may be various word symbols for the same thought. It is not necessary that this particular word Aum should be the word representative of the thought out of which the universe has become manifested. To this objection we reply that this Aum is the only possible symbol which covers the whole ground, and there is none other like it. The sphota is the material of all words, yet it is not any definite word, in its fully formed state. That is to say, if all the peculiarities which distinguish one word from another be removed, then what remains will be the sphota. Therefore, this sphota is called the Nada Brahma, the sound Brahman. Now, as every word symbol intended to express the inexpressible sphota will so peculiarize, it is that it will no longer be the sphota. That symbol which particularizes it the least, and at the same time most approximately expresses its nature, will be the truest symbol thereof. And this is the Om, and the Om only, because these three letters, A, U, and pronounced in combination as Aum, may well be the generalized symbol of all possible sounds. The letter A is the least differentiated of all sounds. Therefore Krishna says in the Gita, I am A among the letters. Again, all articulate sounds are pronounced in the space within the mouth, beginning with the root of the tongue and ending in the lips. The throat sound is ah, and is the lip sound. And the oo exactly represents the rolling forward of the impulse, which begins at the root of the tongue till it ends in the lips. If properly pronounced, this Aum will represent the whole phenomenon of sound production. And no other word can do this. And this therefore is the fittest symbol of the sphota, which is the real meaning of the Aum. And as the symbol can never be separated from the thing signified, the Aum and the sphota are one. And as the sphota, being the finer side of the manifested universe, is nearer to God, and is indeed the first manifestation of divine wisdom, this Aum is truly symbolic of God. Again, just as the one only Brahman, the Akhananda Satchitananda, the undivided existence knowledge bliss, can be conceived by imperfect human souls only from particular standpoints and associated with particular qualities, so this universe, his body, has only to be thought of along the line of the thinker's mind. This direction of the worshipper's mind is guided by its prevailing elements, or tattvas. The result is that the same God will be seen in various manifestations as the possessor of various different predominant qualities, and the same universe will appear as full of manifold forms. Even as in the case of the least differentiated and the most universal symbol Aum, thought and sound symbol are seen to be inseparably associated with each other. So also this law of the inseparable association applies to the many differentiated views of God and the universe. Each of them, therefore, must have a particular word symbol to express it. These word symbols evolved out of the deepest spiritual perceptions of sages. They symbolize and express as nearly possible the particular views of God and the universe they stand for. And as the Aum represents the Akhanda, the undifferentiated Brahman, the others represent Khanda, or differentiated views of the same being, and they are all helpful to divine meditation and the acquisition of true knowledge. Worship of substitutes and images. The next points to be considered are the worship of pratikas, or of things more or less satisfactory as substitutes for God, and the worship of pratimas or images. What is the worship of God through a pratika? It is joining the mind with devotion to that which is not Brahman, taking it to be Brahman, says Bhagavan Ramanuja. Worship the mind as Brahman. This is internal. And the Akasha is Brahman. This is with regard to the Devas, says Shankara. The mind is an internal pratika. The Akasha is an external one. And both have to be worshipped as substitutes of God. He continues, similarly, the sun is Brahman. This is the command. He who worships name as Brahman, in all such passages, the doubt arises as to the worship of pratikas. The word pratika means going towards, and worshipping a pratika is worshipping something as a substitute, which is in some one or more respects like the Brahman more and more, but is not the Brahman. Along with the pratikas mentioned in the Shrutis, there are various others to be found in the Puranas and the Tantras. In this kind of pratika worship may be included all the various forms of Pitri or mains worship and Deva or God worship. Now, worshipping Ishvara and Him alone is Bhakti. The worship of anything else, Deva or Pitri, or any other being, cannot be Bhakti. The various kinds of worship of the various Devas are all to be included in ritualistic karma, which gives the worshipper a particular result in the form of some celestial enjoyment, but can neither give rise to bhakti nor lead to mukti. One thing, therefore, has to be carefully borne in mind. If, as it may happen in some cases, the highly philosophic ideal, or the supreme Brahman, is dragged down by pratika worship to the level of the pratika, and the pratika itself is taken to be Atman, or self, the worshipper, or his Antaryaman, or God as inner ruler, the worshipper gets entirely misread, as no pratika can really be the Atman of the worshipper. But where Brahman himself is the object of worship, and the pratika stands only as a substitute or suggestion thereof, that is to say, where through the pratika the omnipresent Brahman is worshipped, or the pratika itself being idealized into the cause of all, the Brahman, the worship is positively beneficial. Nay, it is absolutely necessary for all mankind until they have got beyond the primary or preparatory state of the mind in regard to worship. When, therefore, any gods or other beings are worshipped in and for themselves, such as worship in ritualistic karma and as a vidya or science, it gives us only the fruit belonging to that particular vidya. But when the devas or any other beings are looked upon as Brahman and worshipped, the result obtained is the same as by worshipping of Ishvara. This explains how, in many cases, both in the Shrutis and Smritis, a god or a sage or some extraordinary being is taken up and lifted, as it were, out of its own nature and idealized into Brahman, and it is then worshipped. Says the Advaitin, is not everything Brahman when the name and the form have been removed from it? Is not he, the Lord, the innermost self of everyone? Says the Vishishtavin Advaitin. The fruition of even the worship of Advaitas, Brahman himself bestows, because he is ruler of all, says Shankara in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Here in this way does Brahman become the object of worship, because he, as Brahman, is superimposed on the pratikas, just as Vishnu are superimposed upon images. The same ideas apply to the worship of the pratimas as to that of the pratikas. That is to say, if the image stands for a god or a saint, the worship is not the result of bhakti and does not lead to liberation. But if it stands for the one God, the worship thereof will bring both bhakti and mukti. Of the principal religions of the world, we see Vedantism and Buddhism and certain forms of Christianity freely using images. Only two religions, Mohammedanism and Protestantism, refuse such help. Yet the Mohammedans use the graves of their saints and martyrs almost in the place of images, and the Protestants, in rejecting all concrete helps to religion, are drifting away every year further and further from spirituality, till at present there is scarcely any difference between the advanced Protestants and the followers of Auguste Comte, or the agnostics who preach ethics alone. Again, in Christianity and Mohammedanism, whatever exists of image worship is made to fall under that category in which the pratika or pratima is worshipped in itself, but not as a help to the vision of God. Therefore, it is at best only of the nature of ritualistic karmas, and cannot produce either bhakti or mukti. In this form of image worship, the allegiance of the soul is given to other things than Ishvara, and therefore such use of images or graves or temples or tombs is real idolatry. It is in itself neither sinful nor wicked. It is a right, a karma, and worshippers must and will get the fruit thereof. The chosen ideal. The next thing to be considered is what we know as Ishta Nishita. One who aspires to be a bhakta must know that so many opinions are so many ways. He must know that all the various sects and the various religions are the various manifestations of the glory of the same Lord. They call you by so many names. They divide you, as it were, by different names. Yet in each one of these is to be found your omnipotence. You reach the worshipper through all of these. Neither is there any special time so long as the soul has intense love for you. You are so easy of approach. It is my misfortune that I cannot love you. Not only this, the bhakta must take care not to hate or even to criticize those radiant sons of light who are the founders of various sects. He must not even hear them spoken ill of. Very few indeed are those who are at once the possessors of an extensive sympathy and power of appreciation, as well as an intensity of love. We find as a rule that liberal and sympathetic sects lose the intensity of religious feeling, and in their hands, religion is apt to degenerate into a kind of politico-social club life. On the other hand, intense, narrow sectaries, whilst displaying a very commendable love of their own ideals, are seen to have acquired every particle of that love by hating everyone who is not of exactly the same opinions as themselves. Would to God that this world was full of men who were as intense in their love as worldwide in their sympathies. But such are only few and far between. Yet we know that it is practicable to educate large numbers of human beings into the ideal of a wonderful blending of both the width and the intensity of love. And the way to do that by this path of the Ishta Nishita, or steadfast devotion to the chosen ideal. Every sect of every religion presents only one ideal of its own to mankind, but the eternal Vedantic religion opens to mankind an infinite number of doors for ingress into the inner shrine of divinity, and places before humanity an almost inexhaustible array of ideals, there being in each of them a manifestation of the Eternal One. With the kindest solicitude, the Vedanta points out to aspiring men and women the numerous roads hewn out of the solid rock of the realities of human life by the glorious sons or human manifestations of God in the past and in the present, and stands with outstretched arms to welcome all, to welcome even those that are yet to be, to that of truth and that ocean of bliss, wherein the human soul, liberated from the net of Maya, may transport itself with perfect freedom and with eternal joy. Bhakti Yoga, therefore, lays on us the imperative command not to hate or deny any one of the various paths that lead to salvation. Yet the growing plant must be hedged round to protect it until it has grown into a tree. The tender plant of spirituality will die if exposed too early to the action of a constant change of ideas and ideals. Many people, in the name of what may be called religious liberalism, may be seen feeding their idle curiosity with a continuous succession of different ideals. With them, hearing new things grows into a kind of disease, a sort of religious drink mania. They want to hear new things just by way of getting a temporary nervous excitement, and when one such exciting influence has had its effect on them, they are ready for another. Religion is, with these sort of people, a sort of intellectual opium eating, and there it ends. There is another sort of man, says Bhagwan Ramakrishna, who is like the pearl oyster of the story. The pearl oyster leaves its bed at the bottom of the sea and comes up to the surface to catch the rainwater when the star Swati is in the ascendant. It floats about on the surface of the sea with its shell wide open until it has succeeded in catching a drop of the rainwater, and then it dives deep down into the seabed, and there it rests until it has succeeded in fashioning a beautiful pearl out of that raindrop. This is indeed the most poetical and forcible way in which the theory of Ishta Nishita has ever been put. This ekanishita, or devotion to one ideal, is absolutely necessary for the beginner in the practice of religious devotion. He must say with Hanuman in the Ramayana, "Though I know that the Lord of Shri, or Vishnu, and the Lord of Janaka, or Rama, are both manifestations of the same Supreme Being, yet my all in all is the lotus-eyed Rama." Or, as was said by the sage Tulsidas, he must say, "Take the sweetness of all, sit with all, take the name of all, say, yeah, yeah, but keep your seat firm." Then, if the devotional aspirant is sincere, out of this little seed will come a gigantic tree like the Indian banyan, sending out branch after branch and root after root to all sides, till it covers the entire field of religion. Thus will the true devotee realize that he who was his own ideal in life is worshipped in all ideals, by all sects, under all names, and through all forms.